Good morning and welcome to Bridging the Budget, Financing Strategies for Producers and CFOs, brought to you by the Independent Film and Television Alliance and presented by Wrapbook Payroll. And my name is Robin Burt. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Membership for IFTA and the American Film Market, which is taking place in Los Angeles this year, November 11 through 16 at the Fairmont Century Plaza. And we hope you'll join us in just under 5 weeks' time. Today's webinar will focus on better understanding and leveraging financing strategies to stretch and maximize your budget in the current landscape. And today's panelists will share their insider knowledge of how to get your project financed. I'd like to thank our partner, Wrapbook, the next standard in film and TV payroll and production accounting, a force multiplier that empowers finance and accounting teams to accomplish more faster with greater data integrity. With Wrapbook's next-gen technology, you can run payroll with a click and manage your finances seamlessly in a fully integrated production accounting solution. Plus, with concierge service and an engineering team that's constantly innovating, Wrapbook keeps you a step ahead of a changing industry. Before we get started, I'd like to share a short video from our friends at Wrapbook. And before I introduce the moderator, we will be taking questions from the audience. Click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Will French, one of the most prominent tax credit finance specialists in the industry. He was among the first brokers and financiers of film finance credits in the nation, bringing in 2003 with the first of its kind Louisiana transferable tax credit program. Through his network of operating companies, Will has personally traded or financed more than $750 million worth of state film credits for more than 350 projects. In 2018, he joined a small startup called the Forest Road Company, which he helped grow into the largest non-bank financier of tax credits in the United States, and which ultimately purchased the market-leading 3 Point Capital. In 2021, he left Forest Road and joined Fallbrook Financial Services, the largest trader of state tax credits in the country, where he leads the company's film finance, tax credit administration, and tax credit consulting practices. And it's with great pleasure to hand it over to Will to introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Robin. It's great to be here today for another terrific IFTA webinar. I'd like to begin by giving special thanks to you and the Independent Film and Television Alliance. Thank you for constantly advocating for the independent film industry. Your voice is loud and strong, and the work you do, including hosting the American Film Market, or AFM, is critical to the success of the indies. And to Wrapbook, bringing sophisticated technological improvements, including artificial intelligence, to the payroll industry and helping to modernize the way that business is done in Hollywood. Thank you for sponsoring our panel today and for all you do to support independence as well. Now to our panelists. First, we have Patrick Rizzotti. Patrick is a seasoned film producer and financing executive with over 2 decades of experience in the entertainment industry. As the founder of Crossroad Productions, Patrick made a significant impact on independent filmmaking, producing a variety of successful films that have garnered international acclaim. In addition to his work in film production, Patrick is the founding member of Blue Fox Financing, a revolutionary marketplace specializing in debt and gap financing for film and television producers. With Blue Fox Financing, Patrick and his team provide critical financial solutions such as tax credit lending, international pre-sales, union deposit loans, and gap financing, helping filmmakers navigate the complex financial landscape of independent film production. Blue Fox Financing also brings distribution capabilities to the table through its affiliation with Blue Fox Entertainment. Patrick and the Blue Fox team, led by James Huntsman, are truly building a versatile platform to help the independent community get films made and distributed. He's also a good friend. We've done a number of deals together in the last few years. Welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, Will.
Now, Paula Paizes. Paula serves as Chief Operating Officer and President of Production at Pressman Film, the independent production company founded by legendary producer Edward R. Pressman. She oversees finance, distribution, production, merchandising, strategy, and business affairs, wow, for the Los Angeles-based company behind such films as Wall Street, American Psycho, Badlands, Thank You for Smoking, and The Crow. Paula is also a producer on Gus Van Zant's latest film, Dead Man's Wire, and was a key part of the team responsible for selling it at Toronto to new distributor Row K. She also produced Bad Lieutenant Tokyo in partnership with Neon, as well as The Crow 2024 with Lionsgate. Paul is currently working across a slate of 20 film and TV projects and managing a library of over 100 titles, and is regularly invited to participate in industry panels at Cannes, TIFF, and AFM. I just barely missed out on working with Paula, Cassian Elways, and the team, the production team on Dead Man's Wire, which I'm very sad about because the film has done great in all respects. But I'm looking forward to working with you on the next one, and welcome, Paula.
Thank you.
And then we have Ryan Broussard, Wrapbook's VP of Sales and Production Incentives. Ryan has worked with productions of all sizes, from the largest studio features to the smallest independent projects, to help them optimize their production incentive strategies and make the most of their budgets. His career in production payroll began 16 years ago. In that time, he's worked at payroll companies like EP, CAPS, and Media Services. He's worked on production incentives from nearly every possible angle, developing innovative reporting measures to facilitate faster audits, advising countless productions on state tax incentives, and even helping some states and local jurisdictions design their own incentive programs. Ryan combines his industry-leading expertise with an emphasis on client service. He's helped clients budget their projects to ensure production incentives are applied correctly, has worked directly with clients' financial institutions to help production secure financing using incentives, and he maintains active relationships with every major film office. I've known Ryan for the better part of the last 20 years. We're both located here in New Orleans, and I consider him a friend and one of the most knowledgeable people in the incentive community. He's also incredibly generous with his time and loves to help producers navigate the challenging world of incentives. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Will. Thank you.
Let's begin with a little bit of an overview. Today, we'll be talking about financing strategies and factors that impact those strategies, like incentives, guilds, crew availability, equity investors, studio partners, et cetera, et cetera. Our goal will not be to put you to sleep with stuff that you already know, but also not to go over your heads. We just want you to walk away today feeling like you're a little bit smarter than you were at 9 a.m. Pacific time. We're going to cover a lot of ground, including getting technical about incentives and applying financing strategies to real world situations, like how bridge loans can save your picture. We'll also discuss a bit of what's happening around the world and examine trends in production locations. Now, panelists, let's take our audience through the universe of the most common financing structures. As a quick overview, we'll discuss equity, that's going out to sophisticated or unsophisticated investors, distribution financing, including pre-sales, minimum guarantees, and backstops, and we'll learn a little bit about the difference there. Gap, which has both a technical meaning and a non-technical meaning, the technical one being borrowing against the value of unsold territories, and the non-technical meaning, which is just plugging a hole in your budget. And we'll talk about incentives financing, state programs, the federal wonky component, which we call Section 181, but which is very important to filmmaking these days in the US. And we'll also cover bridge loans. So Paula, let's begin with you. Can you please discuss the process of raising equity from investors?
So the hardest part of the finance plan typically is the equity piece. And every indie project needs it, unless you're doing it with a studio where they're coming in and financing. So if you're just starting out, you would usually go to your family and friends, right? That's where you're going to try to go and get your your investors. There are sophisticated investors, unsophisticated investors being the family and friends, although that doesn't sound great. Of course, they can be sophisticated in their own way, but in terms of investing. So for us, as a production company that's been established for a long time, nearly 40 years, and we make a lot of movies, we have a network of equity investors that we go to. And so we will go out to them, and they can be high net worth individuals, funds. They come from all sorts of places, and we will go to them, and often if they have had success with us, then they'll come back in. I mean, equity is high risk capital. It comes in second position to the debt. So you're looking for people that, yes, they want a return, but there's no guarantee there. So they're typically going to want to come in for different reasons. Those reasons we've found are their red carpet moment. That's a big deal for some people. For them to go to the set, mix with the actors, producers, director, be part of something is very important for some people, especially high net worths. If they've had careers, they have money, they've built businesses, now they want to do something fun. So we find that that's often a reason for them to come in, but obviously they want to recoup their money. So in terms of recoupment, if you want me to talk a little bit about that, Will, in terms of what the deal would look like.
Yeah.
So it's pretty typical for equity these days. I mean, the equity is going to get 20% on their money. They're second to the debt in the waterfall. They're going to participate in what's called the financier's profit pool, which is 50%, usually 50% of the net profit, and they share in a pro rata pari passu way. So it means all these equity players are getting their money out at the same time, in the proportion that they invested to that 50%.
Got it. And what percentage of a budget would you, practically speaking, expect to cover with equity these days? I mean, I'm assuming we've all seen the perfect case where an equity investor is going to write a check for literally 100% of the budget, but that's not really the way it normally works.
No, it's kind of not happening now. It's become higher and higher as the debt has become a little more conservative, and Patrick will speak to that. But I find that the debt will come in at 15 to 20%, hopefully 20%, maybe a little more. The tax credits, if you can net 23, 25%, in some jurisdictions, and Ryan will speak to this, you can get higher, but your net amount to production, because it's all based on the spend in the jurisdiction, let's say it averages 25%. So we're talking about, on that 20 and 25, we're talking 55% of equity, which is a huge slug.
Got it. Thank you very much, Paula. Patrick, let's turn it over to you to discuss sort of the traditional distribution financing models.
Yeah, and I, if you don't mind, I'm going to touch a little bit on the equity too, because I think they're kind of one and the same. Because you're throwing everything in the same pot in order to get the 100% of the financing for your project. What I would suggest on the equity side is have a plan in place of how you're going to raise all of the financing, even beyond the equity, and really create that financing plan. For example, you can always assume, depending on where you're shooting, you're going to get a 25% tax credit in certain locations. So in that standpoint, as Paula mentioned, you only need 75%. I would immediately, if possible, go to an international sales company and do projections of what the value of the entire world unsold is. So then when you go to an equity investor, you have a model in place. You're saying, hey, we're reducing your risk by getting the loan against the tax credit. And now your equity is against the value of this project. So there's a real commodity there versus an unknown commodity, because there's no third party giving estimates. And it's all about reducing the equity as much as you possibly can throughout the packaging of the film. So with the right director, with the right actor, God willing, you get to a place where you can go to a U.S. distributor and get either a backstop deal or a minimum guarantee, or you could have the right package and you're going to one of these the fantastic sales companies that take it to AFM or Berlin or Cannes. But it's all about how do you package the film to a point where you can attract the distributors to put up minimum guarantees that you can then leverage against with institutional financing.
Let me dig in a little bit more on the idea of the minimum guarantee or the backstop, because this is essentially a third-party company, maybe a very large company, maybe a very small company, saying, we think that this film is going to sell for X amount of dollars, and so we're going to guarantee that when you deliver this film to us for distribution or to someone else for distribution, that it will hit certain benchmarks of performance. How do you go about assessing the value of an MG or a backstop? I mean, do you have to start digging in on what that company's financials look like?
It's a small network, as you know, Will, as a lender, of institutions, banks, private lending companies that communicate with each other. So there are certain distributors that everyone kind of universally is agreeing to lend against without having to look at financials every time. And then there's the kind of the mid-tier distributors where you may not be as familiar with their financials. And basically what you're lending against as a lender is the ability for them to actually pay that guarantee. So at that point, when you become a little bit less familiar of who that distributor is, and knowing that the distributor is paid on their NGs over the course of X amount of years, you start to want to see some basic financials. What we typically do and ask for is usually 2 or 3 years of P&L, potentially tax return, and really what you're looking for is, do they have the ability to pay that down? And that's an important factor. One of the areas that we have found that kind of offsets that a little bit, depending on the distributor, is asking for a larger deposit from the distributor on signing. That threshold is typically like 20% or more, because what it does to a lender is it makes them feel even more comfortable that they already have risked 20 or 25 or 30% on signing, so that they're even more probable to finish that payment, finish the rest of the payment.
Thanks. I want to focus now on the ever elusive gap. Paula just sort of took us through 20% here, 25% there. You're left with 55%, which is a big slug of equity. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes that equity investor is not going to put up the balance of what you need. And so you're left with something, this gap that you've got to fill, that you've got to plug. The banks that I think most of us have seen in recent years have essentially pulled away from gap lending. And so you are a lender, Patrick, in the space. You do gap loans. Tell us about that. How do you underwrite a gap loan? What are you looking for? What kind of percentage of the budget can we cover with a gap loan, or and what kind of rates are we talking about in terms of interest? Because I'm guessing that's riskier than just lending against a pre-sale from an established distributor.
Yeah, we have a unique angle, because not only do we have the ability to provide a gap financing, but we also work with a lot of fantastic companies that also do that. And we're constantly reaching out to new companies that we read about, that we hear about, that we meet, to open that pool as wide as possible, since it is, arguably the hardest financing to get right now. Internally, the way that we analyze a project, generally speaking, and there's certainly always adjustments to that, is we typically like to see the gap amount no less than 15 to 20% of the entire budget. Is kind of a loose threshold for us. And then additionally, there's the asks and the takes. We immediately go to the takes as the worst case scenario, and we are looking to make sure it's a reputable sales company that we know and trust their numbers, and then we typically reduce down to ideally a third of the takes. And what that means is they would have to be worse than delivering, less than a third of what they're projecting as the worst case scenario. And as I think any sales company would tell you on the international market, there's a lot of variables right now. And so you have to be very conservative as a lender that if they drastically miss those takes, that you're still covered. So that's usually our threshold, 15 to 20% of the budget. Again, there's situations where we would go higher. And then typically a third upwards to 50% of the takes. Anything over 50%, it's very unlikely that we or anyone that we work with would be interested in that gap deal.
So from a pricing perspective, again, there's more risk in here, I'm guessing. Are you keeping the pricing the same as the rest of the financing package, and you're just sort of accounting for the risk by discounting the value of those potential sales on unsold territories? Like you say, only lending against, say, 30% or a third of the takes, meaning the lowest possible, anticipated sale price. How does that factor into pricing?
Yeah, and I love to get your opinion, Paula, too, on just the deals that you guys have done. In my experience, it is not the same number as anything on the debt side. It's always going to be higher. And given how hard that financing is, it's, I would say anywhere between 17.5% to 30%. And even now, there's many scenarios where there's an equity component, even be it could be a small piece on the back end. But there's a lot of these lenders that are looking for some upside beyond the 20%, just because it's a risk. You could be lending at a third of the takes, and they only sell 10% of the takes. So there's still considerable risk. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely our experience as well. It's ranging, as you say, like 15 to 30. The last deal we did, we got very lucky because the lender was doing the tax credit as well, so we managed to do a better gap percentage. It was in the 22% range, but I've seen 25%. And yes, the piece of equity being offered now is the carrot, because that they want to have a little more incentive. The gap lender wants more incentive there.
Gotcha. Thanks. That was super helpful. So we've covered equity, we've covered distribution lending, pre-sales, MGs, backstops, gap. I'd like to turn it over to Ryan now to give us a bit of a primer on incentives. Incentives in the U.S. have been around for a little bit more than 20 years now, starting with some of those like the Louisiana program, for example, and have been through lots of history, lots of ups and downs, lots of life cycles, and the whole industry is familiar with them these days, whereas they were brand new, 20 some years ago, as far as most American producers were concerned. Ryan, let me toss it over to you to talk about incentives in general and just take us through how they work and what's good and what's bad about them.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I think that, Paula and Patrick are right in the sense of, Paula mentioned all this kind of has to go into the pot. And then Patrick was saying, you need to have this plan when laying things out. And production incentives are a huge part of that plan. The mistake I see a lot of times is people kind of go in right away with production incentives, and they haven't even started the equity conversation or the MG conversation. And they're like, hey, they go to a financier and they're like, hey, I'm getting back 25% from a state with nothing else to back that up. So they are a part of that plan, but they do have to come adjacent with those other parts. With that said, as Will mentioned, the tax incentives have been around for quite some time. Runaway production, or that term runaway production, has been around, but it originally happened to Canada, right? California was losing so much to Canada. And so then, the United States and many states started to launch their own programs, like Will mentioned, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Georgia were kind of the first three. There's a debate of who was the first. I'll keep that to myself, who I think it was, but they were the kind of first three to do it out of the gate. And what's interesting now is it's actually harder to find states that don't offer a production incentive in the current landscape of the United States. So that's pretty interesting in itself. What typically people do is these incentives can either be a tax credit or like a rebate or a grant. Those tax credits can be unique. They can differ from state to state. I always say every state's kind of like a snowflake. So don't just say like, oh, this one's transferable, so it's just like this other transferable state I worked in. Every single state has its own unique rules and guidelines that you do have to abide by in order to capitalize on these programs. But with financing those things, you know, and I might even throw it back to Will and Patrick on this, and Paula's experience with this. Those incentive programs are adherent on usually you completing that project, right? And then you do, as Paula mentioned, you spend a certain amount in the state, and you get money back on if you met minimum criteria in those particular states. You will get that back after you do a certain a good chunk of hurdles, depending on the state. Some have more than others. And then you'll get that credit or that grant or that money or that check back in a certain way. And then it's up to you to broker it with people like Will and his group at Fallbrook or others, to if it's transferable to make money off of it, or if you're working on the front end to work with people like Will and Patrick and other people that Paula knows, I'm sure, to say, hey, we're getting back X amount, we're getting back $1 million from Louisiana. You know, can you do a loan on that? You know, we've got all of our equity in place. We've got MGs here, and we're going to be getting this if we complete this show, but we need the cash flow to complete that show. And we don't have that cash flow yet because you don't get the money until you're done, and you're usually done an audit and all that fun stuff. So that's where people like the people at Finance Against Tax Incentives, you know, Will, Patrick, come into play significantly to say, okay, let's, you know, how much do we know about that state? What's the experience in the state? How fast do they turn out the money? What's the experience there with the auditors? So that's kind of, and that's very jumbled, but that's kind of, you know, a whole kind of amalgam of tax incentives as it, you know, partakes to a budget and financing.
Patrick, let me toss it over to you, because Ryan brings up the financing side of tax credits, and you were telling us a little bit about sort of the rates on the gap side of the financing. And so, where do you see kind of rates landing on your deals on the tax credit piece, say?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'd like to address what you guys are talking about just a little bit too, because it's a really important topic that very few producers think about all the way through, even seasoned ones, because there's so many variables on what you can even lend against on a particular tax credit, and what that tax credit is netting out to be after all the costs and the transfer costs and selling the credit versus just getting a check back from the state. But I think, Ryan, if you offer the service, I think it would be fantastic, because I know how knowledgeable you are, to have you as a soundboard to producers, as a consultant in some capacity, as they're contemplating where can they maximize the tax credit in the US today, where they can get the most tax credit back, potentially also the best crews that are actually available, so you're not bringing everyone in, along with the ability to lend against that tax credit, is such an important element. Because, you know, you think about like places like Georgia, and there, you know, yes, it's a very high tax credit, but there's also a lot of hurdles, as you know, Will, of what you need to do in order to accomplish that tax credit. And it becomes a lot riskier from a lender's perspective to want to lend against it without a bond and as you're in production, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong that as a lender you could be out the entire tax credit if they don't do it properly. So it's such an important element that I don't think you could talk about enough. We could spend an entire hour, I think, literally just talking about that.
There's one other Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Paula, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's one other important factor in the tax credits too. It's the time it takes for the return of the money, because that impacts the loan. So you have to factor in cost of money for a period of time. So if you're not familiar with the turnaround time of a particular state, I mean, New York has been notorious for, 2 years, 3 years? I mean, who even knows, right? Now it's getting better. But, that's a huge thing from a lender's point of view, right, Patrick? I mean, and a producer, how do you cover that?
Definitely.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
all
would just add a few other pieces to the tax credit discussion, which is one, you better be organized because you don't get a tax credit if you don't have all your receipts. The receipts are worth their weight in gold when it comes to tax credits. Bad accounting means longer audits, means you're going to pay more in interest. That interest might be 10 to 20% on a tax credit loan. It really adds up. So be organized, have very good accounting, and Patrick brings up a good point about you make a mistake, you might get zeroed out on your tax credit. Georgia did some things last year where they said they were sending notices to producers, hey, we haven't received your expenditure report yet. If we don't get it in a week or 2 weeks, we're just going to decertify you. And these emails were going to people's spam folders. And then when they submitted their audit, the state said, hey, we told you, you're zeroed out here because you didn't submit the report on time. And the producer said, well, how was I supposed to know you sent the report? It literally went to my spam. You have to be very careful. What I think this underscores, and the producing community doesn't like to hear this, but there has to be a level of diligence by the producers going through with respect to the accounting and the organization and providing the materials to the governments that they need in order to stay in good standing, which means that the tax credit lenders are requiring personal guarantees from producers because they have to have that skin in the game to know that that's all going to get done for the lender to be comfortable making the loan to begin with, which will then also usually require some kind of an accounting review as well. Well,
Yeah,
I think
you bring up a great point. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I see right off the bat when people do send me their budgets, whether they are asking me where are we going or they're saying, hey, we're going to Louisiana or Georgia or Kentucky, is I go right to their accounting line. And if that is under budgeted right away, I'm like, whoa, like big red flag. And I have to let them know you've got to put they are the backbone of your tax incentive and your show, right? Is those accounting teams. So if you plan on getting an accountant, you nailed it. Like, I can't express it enough. Put money towards the accounting team and the organization using a production payroll company like Wrapbook or whomever to organize and make sure that things are flagged and accounted for correctly. It is the legitimacy of your tax credit.
Ryan, we need to move the conversation along a little bit, and part of that's going to be the 181 discussion. Can you just give us a couple of sentences on what Section 181 is, and then I'm going to ask Paula to kind of go into some of her experiences.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, we talked about in vague terms kind of all the states and their uniqueness of offerings from an incentive standpoint. The Fed, so the actual United States does have an offering currently. It is the Section 181. Full disclaimer, it is set to expire at the end of this year. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, as this panel moves on. But basically, it's not as cut and dry as a tax credit or a grant or a rebate. It is more of a deduction on a taxpayer in a company where they take a deduction based off of kind of the depreciation and what's going on with that particular project. I feel like we could talk about it for an hour and go into the ins and outs of it, and Paula her insight will be extremely valuable. But I think the bottom line that you need to be aware of is it's very good if you get it. It's not super easy to get. And I just mean you have to have resources to do it. You have to have all your ducks in a row. It's not this simple, I did this and now I'm getting that. There is a huge back end channel with it because once again, it's a deduction. It's not a credit or a rebate or a grant. So very different than the way the states have it, or even other countries have it. And maybe Paula can elaborate more on her experience with it.
All right,
Yeah,
Paula, over to you. What did
Okay.
you encounter?
We've done a couple of 181s, actually 3. So we've done it. So I'm happy to say that it was complex. It involves heavy duty legal, accounting, all sorts of education. We've worked with groups that actually bring the investors, so they already have investors interested in that, the tax deferral. So we then have to adopt a structure that works for them so they can get it. That's where the complication comes in. But basically, if you can get it, it's a really great thing for your finance plan, because all of a sudden you have 15 to 20%, because that's the amount that it sort of will go up to, about 20% of your budget as what is now deferred equity. So your equity piece is now preferred, the people you've gone to, and now you've got this chunk, let's say it's 55% equity or 50% equity. If you can bring in 20% of that, now you've got 30% preferred equity, and then the 181. The 181 sits behind the preferred equity, the usual equity. So that's a huge thing, because they're looking for the tax deduction. So it sits behind. So if you can get it, that's great. So that's where it sits in the waterfall. And but as Ryan says, it's complicated. You have to really have professionals on that know what they're doing, and it takes time. So, and obviously you have to shoot in America for that. That's an American.
Yeah, I think there's a cutoff. It's like 75%, but basically do your whole show in America, maybe outside the coast.
Yeah, basically.
So just doing some basic math there. 20% from pre-sales, as we were talking about earlier, 25% from tax gets you to 45, 15% from GAAP gets you to 60, 15% from 181 gets you to 75. Now you've taken that equity slug that you had to raise down from 55% to 25%, and that's a much easier lift, if you can get there. So agreed, if you can get 181, if you qualify, and if you're sophisticated enough, and if you can work through the complex system, it definitely is a good thing to be able to get. Patrick, did you have any thoughts on 181 before we moved on?
Yeah, just real quickly, as a producer, the first thing I would suggest is reach out to a tax attorney that specializes in 181, but sooner rather than later, because there's a lot of nuances that you really want to know to be able to present it correctly, even at a top level, to potential investors. There is a big kind of delineation between a active investor in 181 versus a passive investor, and you have to qualify as an active investor. So without getting in the weeds, because certainly I'm not qualified as a tax attorney to talk about it, but you, as an investor, you have to have active income to offset versus passive income. So if you're getting taxed at a higher tax rate at active income, you need to, ideally, in the perfect scenario, become an active producer. And there's a bunch of qualifications, including hours that you need to put in, physically need to being there on set in order to qualify that. And then the other big elephant in the room on this is you could do everything correctly on the production side, but you need to also work with the attorney, the accountant, and a potential tax attorney on the investor side, because what you don't have no clarity on is, will this work with the investor's taxes? So it gets very complicated. We're in the middle of one right now on figuring out the best scenario, and investors are generally a little timid because they're not familiar with it, and so anything that would raise a flag for them on their overall return of the IRS looking at it, there is. But with that said, it's been done over and over again. It's an unbelievable investment. If you navigate it through, it literally is a game changer, because of the reduction from the investors. Immediately, the first year they invest, they can write it off against their passive or active income.
So talking about an elephant in the room, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because we're getting short on time. We've got 8 minutes before we need to start going into our Q&A. We've got a lot more to cover, so I'm going to ask for some quick answers here. Tariffs. The Trump administration has proposed tariffs on film shot overseas. 181 provides some type of relief to U.S. shot productions if they qualify. Is 181 the long-term answer, or is a long-term answer more of a stackable tax credit like Canada offers or like Australia offers? Let me just, take a straw poll here. Paula, what are your thoughts?
I would love to see a federal tax credit and a
Patrick?
uniform system.
Makes all the sense in the world. If you truly want to keep productions in the US, why not offer a federal rebate? They do it in other industries that cross over, so it's not just on the state level. So why not do it with film and TV?
Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, it's worked so well with Canada. There's a reason why so much stuff still goes there. They have the Fed, and then they have their locals. It is the way to go.
And
So,
Australia
thanks.
does the same thing.
So now we're going to shift gears in a big way, but we need to cover something important, which is you've done everything right, or you think you've done everything right. You have your prep completed, your cameras are ready to roll, your cast is on location, and yet some piece of that financing just isn't ready to close, threatening the whole production. What happens? Where do you go? What does it cost? Paula, this is a bridge loan situation. Tell us about it.
So it's a bridge loan situation, but the first thing we do, because bridge loans cost money, we'll go back to our equity investors. We go back to our equity and see, will you advance? Because they have, you need a completed finance plan, 100% for the loan to fund. That's what we're now waiting for with the bond, right? So who's in there that will do that? It's the equity. So we go back there first. What that can often mean is giving them a little bit more, giving them a better credit, having to give something for that risk. But if you're ready to roll, actors are there. I mean, the chances of it falling over at that point are pretty low. Otherwise, you go to, there are bridge lenders, Walter Jostin, Blue Rider, Sherborne, Headgear's doing it. It's very expensive money because think about it, they've got you at that point where it's a short-term loan, but you have to do something. Also, if you are a production company and you're fortunate enough to have some sort of revenue, you can fund it yourself. Or we've gone out to other parties and brought in other producers, who will fund last minute. Couple of $100,000, we have to get through cash flow. We've got to create a week of time, right? That's what we're doing.
Let's talk rates, because we've been talking about rates for different components of the financing as we've talked about those components. What does a bridge loan cost, essentially?
And Patrick, you can chime in
Yeah,
here.
go ahead.
Expensive. I mean, 20%, 25%. I mean, it's whatever. It's around that. It can be 30%. It's whatever it's expensive money.
And that's for a day, a week, a month, a year?
It's going to be a week, 2 weeks, a month. I mean, it could be.
Yeah, short term.
Yeah, that's short-term loan.
With major defaults, if it blows through the dates.
Yeah.
I would say, Will, and a good important element of seeking a bridge loan is having a really good debt lender that you're working with, because one of the first things that we would do if we were even thinking about it is if Fallbrook was doing the tax credit and we're bridging that gap, for example, we would immediately call you and be like, Will, how real is this deal? What's the likelihood of this deal closing? That is, as a bridge lender, should be the very first thing that you do is look at the rest of the financing and see if you have relationships to know how real it is.
Yeah, thank you. Short on time. Patrick, we've discussed the importance of professionalism, and you mentioned this at the top of the hour, which is about having a really good finance plan. I really want you to dig in on that a little bit, and I'm going to say take a minute here and not much more, and tell us about why it's so important to have that good finance plan.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw it back on you too, because I gave you a quick outline, but I'd love to get your perspective as well, because it's a huge part of your your process of reviewing. But the very first thing is you need to have a finance plan that's very clean and clear of what's getting you to 100% of financing. and include some cost of capital, which producers almost never do. That you look at a budget and the cost of capital is never really there. So immediately it creates a gap, even though they don't have a gap in their financing plan. And it's the first thing as a lender that you look at. So the first thing I look at is, does the budget match the financing plan? And what's the basic financing plan? And what's the probability of them actually closing the rest of the financing? So I'd love to ask you your opinion, Will, because you see so many projects that come in as a lender. What's the first red flag that you see to be like, this is not worth my time to focus on just yet?
So I can sniff out a finance plan pretty quickly, and I know if somebody's going to be wasting my time, or if they're legit, and I should spend time on them trying to get them to a closing. The one thing that I see that I hate is when they say this tax credit is going to be a 25% tax credit, and I'm going to be able to get that 100% of that
That's
cash
right.
available for use against my production budget. That is not the case. You've got to discount the tax credit. You've got a loan to value discount for the risk. You may have to sell the tax credit. You've got finance costs that have to be built in. You're an amateur if you come to me with that, and I'll probably tell you no and spend my time with somebody else's deal. Ryan, I need to throw it over to you. We've got a couple of minutes here. Tell us what's hot and what's not. Where are people shooting around the country? What's the update? And again, just a couple minutes here.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I mean, as we talked about, these things are always changing. This past legislative session was the busiest I've seen in quite some time. The landscape's changed substantially. The fact that now California the fact that California can go by January of next year over 45% is insane. That their base is now 35% is just crazy to me. I just never thought I would see that. And the fact that New York can now get 50%. I mean, it's just total. Paula had mentioned, oh, we factor in 25%. That's the base now.
Right.
Like that's base, you know? So these states are getting very aggressive. So California is actually very hot. A lot of independents I'm working on in California. In fact, the window opened up this week for independents. It's a very small window. So we might be on the tail end of it. It's usually 2 or 3 days for the independent window. But the last window was the most independents they've ever let into that program ever. And I think that that's saying something that, you know, things are changing. Independents are kind of coming out the woodwork. So speaking of independents, I am seeing a lot of people go to Kentucky over the last 2.5 years, especially since they rebrought their program into a refundable tax credit. You can get 30 to 35% there. That's very, very good. There's also some newer kids on the block, like Missouri has some very great stackable incentives. I just worked with Paula on a show there, and you know they can get pretty high there. And when they're a newer state, and me and Will have had this discussion several times, sometimes they can kind of be a little more laxed or roll out the red carpet for productions because they're just excited to have production there, right? And that's something that you as an independent producer can use to your benefit. So Missouri, West Virginia's is very, very good. Indiana, even though they're not terrifically funded, it's only two million. That's really nothing. But the fact that now they're incentivizing non-residents and residents and it's a transferable credit shows their thinking. Like, oh, we went from a non-transferable, non-refundable credit to transferable starting next year. These states are like, hey, this is working. We see an economic impact in other states. Let's go there. Louisiana doesn't, they got rid of their caps, which is super interesting. They want to kind of start bringing back some more television in studios. And New Jersey every single year seems to keep bettering their program. We see people like Netflix and Lionsgate setting up camp there as studio partners. And now they're allowing for, without any restrictions, unscripted companies to go there. So if you're doing an independent doc, you're not out of the running. Don't forget that as well. It's not just scripted stuff, it's unscripted stuff as well. So tons of new stuff coming out with states. California is really the big one. California and New York are really in a match with each other. And I just can't believe how high the numbers are getting.
So guys, fantastic conversation today. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn it over to the IFTA team to take us through the Q&A session here. What kind of good questions are we seeing coming in?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll just continue with you, Ryan. We do have a question from somebody asking if there's any actual cash being given from states, or are they all tax credits?
They're not all tax credits. So some states do have what's called like a grant or a rebate, which is essentially a pot of cash. So you don't have to file a tax return. You don't have to sell it. They're usually the easiest ones to get in terms of like getting back the money and timing wise. However, most of those states are not terribly funded because they are a pot of cash, right? I think North Carolina might be the highest funded grant program out there right now, and they give 25% across the board. But Mississippi's a grant program, Oregon is a grant program, and these are very, very good programs. Oregon, in fact, just upped their percentage. So these are great programs to capitalize on, but there's two things to be aware of. One, when you're budgeting, you need to find out, do they have money left, right? If they're a grant, then the money goes quickly. So you need to find out, like, before you start banking and going to people like Will and Patrick and saying like, hey, I'm going to get this guaranteed, do they have money back? And that can go for a tax credit too, but it's even more crucial for a grant or rebate state because they have less money. And then the second thing is usually a grant or rebate state is a case-by-case basis. They're kind of picky with who they give their credit to. So you always want to have that conversation with the film office ahead of time because it's not guaranteed. They will vet you pretty hard.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yep.
I know you guys didn't really cover this on the panel. Someone is asking if completion bonds are still being used and when would they come into play?
Paula, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that. So, yes, it just depends on the project and the lender. So we made 4 movies this year. One in Missouri with Ryan, another one in Kentucky, one in Japan, and one in Canada. So we did not need a bond on 3 of those indie films. So it just depends on the lender, if the lender requires it. And a lot of third-party lenders don't, depending on who the producer is, depending on the package, the finance plan, the project. Is that right, Patrick?
Yeah, I would just add that, under, I would say, roughly a $5 million budget, it makes it challenging to even get a bond. And most companies want to avoid it under that budget level. So, yeah, I completely agree. As I'm sure, Will, you're because you're looking at it from that perspective too. Who's the team? What's the package?
Yeah.
At what point do they need the cash flow? There is the idea of getting a post bond only, which is significantly less expensive. And if you could delay your tax credit loan or MG loan until after physical production wraps, and the lender is really hard pressed, because you're gonna typically always get the best rates with the bond because it's an added layer of protection for the lender. So if you could hold off until the day after production wraps and get a post bond, there's that option as well.
I think, just speaking about bonds, it used to be, 15 years ago, that every production that was going to have financing had to have a completion bond, and the completion bond companies, really could make all the difference in the world as to whether or not your project was going to move forward or not. It's amazing to me to see how many projects can move forward these days without a bond. I'm looking at 50 projects or so in our portfolio, and only a small handful of them are bonded, and those are going to be the ones where we're representing the banks in doing the tax credit underwriting for the banks. The ones that come to us directly are typically non-bonded deals, and they're safe enough for us to do on the tax credit side because we're going to advance the funds based on the actual spend, not insured potential budgeted spend, but we're going to look at the financials and pull the receipts and the invoices and the bank statements and say, yeah, you've earned this amount of tax credits. Here's your cash for those credits. Go and spend it in production. Yeah, it is an interesting trend these days.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have a question from a UK based, I'm sorry, filmmaker. They are hearing that it's becoming more and more often that projects are reaching 80% of their finance and then they fall through. Can you guys discuss what would be some of the most common reasons for this? And at what point do you guys consider a film to be greenlit?
Patrick, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to explain it is really what is the gap on the project, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier. If you take into account when you're doing your financing plan, all the financing fees that's going to be associated with the financing you have, and it becomes pretty black and white. Do the fees net out to less than the budget that you have? And it's always a combination from a producer's perspective of, can I lower the budget to match it? Can I raise a little bit more equity in order to do it? Can I potentially do another pre-sale or two to help justify it? But that 80% is so many moving parts of how do you balance it out?
Terrific. We've got time for just a couple more. We have a question about what payback looks like. Can you guys explain what sort of a typical waterfall situation looks like? Who gets paid back? When do the filmmakers, take their cut?
Paula?
Yeah, I can do it. So at the top of the waterfall is the sales commissions, costs, fees for the distributor, sales agent. So that's off the top. And then it's going to be the senior debt in the first position, which is the gap. The tax credit money is obviously going back to the lender separately. Next, you'll have your equity, preferred equity. If there's 181, the next that equity comes behind that. There might be a deferment pool for actors, producers, those people that have had to actually reduce that budget to to get it made. Those are our fees that get put into that, because that's where it gets crammed down. So there's a deferment pool, then it's net profit. And so producers are going to take a share of the producer's net profit pool, which can be typically, the floor could be 15-20%, but that pool takes into account all third-party profit participants. So your actors, other partners, crew that you're paying, director, writer, it's all coming out of one pot, because the financing is going to get their 50% completely.
Great questions to our audience. Thank you very much for joining us today. Again, hope you feel smarter now than you were 1 hour ago at 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists, Paula, Patrick, Ryan. You guys are the best. Thank you to Wrapbook for making this webinar possible, and for all the great work that Wrapbook does in the independent space. And of course, thank you to Robin and to the IFTA. The work you do is amazing, and we cannot wait to see you in AFM in just a couple of weeks.
Wonderful.
Yep. Thank you so much. And don't forget yourself, Will.
Yeah, I was say thank you.
Thanks, Will. I want to give an endorsement to Ryan. We worked together in Missouri, and it was a great experience. Thank you, Wrapbook.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love to hear it. I'll take all the endorsements.
I want to say too, as with Will as well and Ryan, you couldn't have two better guys to contact as you're putting your financing together to help kind of brainstorm the best areas to shoot, what's the best lender rates. So I can't speak any more highly of everyone on the panel as well.
Yeah.
You as well, Patrick.
Yeah, very privileged to be a part of this panel.
We'll see you at AFM, guys.
Yeah.
See you at AFM.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate you sharing your time, knowledge, and insight in discussing this topic. I feel like this probably could have gone on for another hour or two. As a recap, a recording of the webinar will be made available early next week. We'll send out an email with a link to the video. For more great insights, as Paula mentioned, make sure to attend the AFM next month. Some of the panelists today will be speaking at AFM. We have a fantastic lineup of panels with over 100 industry experts speaking across 2 stages, topics from treatment to screen and everything in between. To buy a badge to AFM, go to americanfilmmarket.com. Thank you for joining the webinar today, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you.